Well, welcome everyone back to the cabin. My name is Tim Martin with Covenant Creation on YouTube. I have a very special guest here today with Maurice Rogers from New Cosmos Videocast. And Maurice Rogers also released a new book called Everything is Temple. And we're going to talk about Maurice's new book tonight as we enjoy Maurice's company. So Maurice, welcome to Covenant Creation on YouTube.
Thank you very much, Tim. And it's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to actually be speaking with you in person. Well, even if it's online.
Online. Yeah. Super, super special. Now, why don't you tell us where you're from and maybe a little bit about your background and history and how you ended up into preterism?
Well, presently I'm living in the lovely island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I'm originally from another country, which is Guyana, but I came here as a teenager and grew up, went to school, everything like that. In the 1998, that's when I was baptized into a denomination which will forever remain unnamed. But suffice it to say that denomination, one of the things that I really learned in that denomination is the supremacy of Scripture. Right. I learned to submit my mind to the authority of the apostles, the prophets, Christ. And from that background, I also developed an interest in end time prophecy. Well, at that time, I didn't know it was called eschatology, but you can say that I developed a healthy interest in eschatology. Matthew 24, Revelation 12, Revelation 13, Revelation 14, Revelation 20, all of these lovely end time scriptures. And really with a futurist view that these things were happening in our time and would soon culminate in our time. So with that view, the Lord took me on a sabbatical where I was ministering to a small group, and in preparing sermons for that group, preparing studies, not sermons, studies. Actually, in my denomination, I was an elder. So I did do sermons, I did do evangelism, I did do, I was required to head up classes and so on, right? So I had a good background because one of the best ways to learn is to teach. That is what I've discovered. We call it inhaling and exhaling. Yes. So if you inhale and you exhale, you learn. Yes. So anyway, I was preparing some studies, end time studies, and one of the texts that really stood out to me was Matthew 10:23, which Jesus talked about his disciples fleeing the persecution from city of Israel to city of Israel. And during that time, the Son of Man will come. That one caught my eye. And another one, which was actually before that, but I never really considered it so much, and that's John 14, where clearly the return in John 14 was to the disciples.
Right.
But still understanding that, but still having a futurist expectation of a final coming, right? But I did see in John 14, that was a coming of the Comforter, right? Jesus in the Comforter. So I did have that understanding, which was a step forward than most people. But the Matthew 10:23 is the one that really, linked that one. And I'm saying, wow. And from that time, other scriptures began popping in my mind. And as well as going through, the Bible, generally speaking, things started to click. I said, wait, here, this, and then again, I always was interested in looking at the Greek or the Hebrew.
Right.
For whatever reason, I can't remember why, but I remembered one of the first things I did when I was baptized. I started to devour the Bible, and I had a brother of the same denomination, Christian brother, he was hooked up with a ministry in the United States who was sending a lot of books. They would send Bibles, they would send tracts, and we would go out in the community and distribute. But I remember they would send all these different versions of the Bible. Right. So I had New King James Version, I had the literal translations, I had the NIV, I had so many different Bibles, and I would go through them and I'd be like, wow. And that, I guess those different translations got me interested in, well, what, why does this one say it this way and this one say it that way? And so I went and I bought, at that time, we didn't have computers and smartphones and all of that. I went and I bought this hell of a big Strong's Concordance.
Right.
And this was the exhaustive concordance.
I'm pretty sure I have one of those somewhere.
Yeah, man. This thing, it was a monster.
Right.
And I used to go through this thing, man. And so that got me, so I had that foundation, the scriptures,
right,
the languages, the Hebrew, the Greek. And so when I fast forward about, say, 20 years later, when I began, the Lord began showing me these things about the last days, the coming of the Lord. And I began to go into the scriptures and I began to see Mello about to. I'm like, what? But at the same time, there's that thing in the back of your mind, like, hold up, Maurice, because maybe you're being extreme,
right?
You're being extreme because with our denomination, we had a lot of people coming up with a lot of crazy stuff as well, a lot of offshoots happening and things like that. So you build up this kind of caution, right? And as well, realizing that I would be viewed that way as well if I were to start blurting out these things. So I was very cautious. I didn't tell anybody except a very few people in the small group. I was teaching these things. And then I said, you know what? I wonder if anybody else is seeing these things. Because can't be me alone. Right. So I went on the internet now, Googled it. I can't remember the search term I did. I think it's something like around maybe 70 AD temple or something like that. Or coming in 70 AD. But anyway, I got some hits, and one of them was Ed Stevens.
Right.
I went on Ed Stevens' site. I said, wow.
Yeah.
And then I searched YouTube. I saw Ed Stevens had some presentations, and I was like eating up all this thing. And then it's like maybe in the recommendations list on YouTube or something, some way I got to William Bell. Mm-hmm. And it's like, wow. It's like people really have, and they were like, in my mind, these guys was a far advanced of me now.
Right.
So I was like, man, these guys are really good. And it's like everything they say, I will be like, what? I can't remember how I got on to William Bell, but I called up William Bell, man. And he said, William Bell. And I started talking and asking him a whole bunch of questions. One of the questions I had was the resurrection. Because there were two things that I couldn't understand at all. The resurrection and what was the other one, boy? It was two things. I can't remember the other one. It'll come up just now. But anyway, so I asked him about the resurrection, and not criticizing or anything him, but the thing is, the way he answered me, I couldn't get it. It's like he would explain it in the way he best he could, but I just couldn't see it. So anyway, I said, I can't go public with this thing unless I understand the resurrection, and unless I understand this other thing, which I can't remember now.
Well, before we started, I told you I had a little surprise for you.
Yeah.
And let me ask you this: how far away is Trinidad from where you are?
Trinidad is south of St. Vincent, maybe 100 or something miles, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how far away is Curacao and Bonaire and Aruba?
Oh, well, they would be further than Trinidad for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, my surprise for you is I have a background a lot like yours that, I grew up very different than where I am now. And my grandparents started mission work in Curacao, Bonaire, and Aruba, and some in Trinidad in the early 1950s.
Oh,
In
okay.
fact, my father was born on the island of Curacao in the Caribbean islands. In fact, my grandmother wrote a book called The Blessings of Going to the Islands of the Sea by Roberta Martin.
Wow.
She wrote that in 1987, and it documents on her, basically on her letters that she sent back home. They're memoirs that she reconstructed from her letters, and they were on the mission field down there planting independent Baptist churches from like Bob Jones' background, Gospel Fellowship Association, tracks, just revival meetings, getting people saved.
Right.
And that's my grandparents. And then in the 1970s, my family ended up on the mission field in Brazil for some time as well.
Cool.
So it's kind of interesting because you're kind of down there in the Caribbean and I'm in Montana, so we're thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away. But I've got family history back to missions in the Caribbean that I can prove. I can prove it from the 1950s. They were, they were doing the whole, go preach the gospel to every nation so that the end will come.
And it'll come, right? Yes.
1924.
Yeah, and one of my dreams was to own a radio or TV station to do exactly that. And well, since I didn't have the money for the radio station or the TV station, I started a YouTube channel. So that's the next best thing.
So let me ask you about that. How long have you been doing YouTube on New Cosmos Videocast?
Well,
that's how everybody can find you. It's New Cosmos Videocast.
Right. Well, before New Cosmos, it used to be the Sword of the Spirit Bible Study Hour.
Okay.
Right. That was pre-preterism.
Right.
So on the Sword of the Spirit Bible Study Hour, I really used to present my denominational narrative, my denominational understanding, right? And when I began coming into the preterist understanding, I took a break from that, and then I came back and I said, sorry for being away so long. I'm starting a new channel. This is the last video. And I deleted all the videos from that channel. And I said, come to the New Cosmos Videocast. Nice. So I started the new, and that was in, I think that the New Cosmos Videocast started in 2020, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, let me recommend everybody. Maurice has a series on Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 that's ongoing. And I've been blessed by that series, Maurice. You've been kind of doing it nice and gradually so everybody can stay up with everything. I'm a couple episodes behind. I haven't quite got into some of the more recent videos, but I wash windows for a living in the summertime, which means I'm on the job for hours at a time just doing my work, and I can put my headphones in. And when I'm on big jobs, your videos are great because they're usually 2 hours long. And I can just go and listen to you while I'm working. And, with the guys that I have working with me, it's nice that I can listen to that stuff. But I appreciate that series. I recommend that to everybody on the Genesis issues, Genesis chapter 1, Genesis 2, working through that series. And the reason I wanted to have you on tonight is I recently did a book review of your recent book. Brand new book, came out in July. I got my copy in July. I think it might have been late June when you actually released it. But Everything is Temple, How We Live in God's New Heavens and Earth Today. And this is a must-have for anybody that's interested in eschatological studies. Go to Amazon.com. You can find it there and get it directly from there. But I would like to really just let you know, Maurice, that I appreciate your work with that book. I was blessed this summer. I was able to use your book in some of my conference presentations, citations in St. Louis, Missouri with Steve Magua. and the Ask the Pastor conference that they had in August. I got your book like 3 weeks before the conference. So I'm like going through really fast. I've got my presentation. I'm like, this is perfect. And so I used, I don't know, there's probably 3 or 4 citations from your book that ended up in my conference presentation. And I wanted to do a book review back in the summertime. I wanted to just drop everything and do a book review, put up on YouTube and stuff. But my season is so busy here in Montana. I have a very seasonal business, and I have a farm and other responsibilities that are seasonal. So I had to wait until my winter time came, and that was like on the top of my list to get done. So I just released that book review of Everything is Temple on the YouTube channel for everybody to see, and I kind of went over there. But what I love about your book, Maurice, among many things, is it appears to me that you've really meditated on the narrative of Scripture in a very deep and powerful way. And the insights in this book just really kind of blew me away, because I just appreciate your time and effort and care to study out God's word and meditate on the connections, because I think what makes your book really interesting is the connections that you draw from the beginning of the Bible all the way to the end. And it's all one story for you in that temple context. And that's not common for people to understand God's word that way, but it's very powerful within the context of fulfillment and preterist ideas. So I just want to thank you for that, and I love the way you laid it out. The first, you first opened it up with the first chapter was the good news. Let's see, a new creation has come. And you started with Genesis. That was a surprise to me, but that was awesome. So tell me a little bit about that first chapter and kind of how you opened up the book.
Yes, well, that book, let me just go back a bit. That's my third book.
Right.
The first book I wrote was Why Christ Has Already Come Back and Why the Church Will Never Believe It. And that book was for me to document my understanding of the coming of Christ.
Right.
Even as I go back and I look at it, there's still some tweaks that I would make. But anyway, suffice it to be that way. And then after that, now, the question that was always given to me or asked of me was, well, if Christ has already come back, what are we doing now? What's there for us? What's, that, because, the futurist eschatology really is emotionally ingrained into us. Right. We are all in on that's like the thing. Christ coming. That's the focus. That's the goal. Now that you take that away, is like, what's left? All my hope is gone.
It's like that safety blanket that the toddler has. That the toddler's got to grow up someday, right? It's got to go away, but they don't want to let it go. They like hang on to it. It's like their security. Yeah, exactly.
And I remember understanding it, and that's why I try to put some things in place before, so the second book was kind of like how God helped me with that same question, because once I understand who I was in Christ, right, because of what was accomplished in 70 AD, well, from 30 AD to 70 AD, it now gave me a new identity in which it's not really looking for something, but is what already has been provided, right? And so it was like a real, as they say, a mind bender to now be looking at things, as I put in my book there, instead of living in the end, you're living in the beginning, right? And so that the key to living that way is to understand who you are in Christ, what was obtained by Christ. And so I put that in the second book. What's that now? I am. It is by the grace of God I am. Yeah. A journey into my true identity, into the discovery of my true identity. So that second book was like to help those who um, are asking that question.
Right.
Because once you have that already, then it takes care of that question.
Right.
So the third book now is like after, because really and truly, I really wanted to go on to some other kind of studies.
Yeah.
Right? But it's like now once I started the channel, I was forced now to, because people are asking some other questions which I never thought of before,
Right.
and then I'm coming into like uh I'm hearing about covenant creation,
Right.
and some of the folks who I respect, hearing them with covenant creation, and some also are against it.
Right. Right.
And for a while there was a skepticism there for me with covenant creation. I remember Pastor Miano. He had a online meeting that was supposed to talk about covenant creation. And for some reason, I was late to the meeting. And so when I came in, they were already wrapping up. And so I didn't get to hear anything about that. So I said, you know what? Let me investigate the thing. I downloaded the Beyond Covenant Creation, but for some reason, I don't know why people accuse this book of things which it really didn't help me any with covenant creation, to be honest.
Right.
Beyond covenant, beyond
Beyond creation
beyond
science.
creation science, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, beyond creation science. I mean, please forgive me, but beyond creation science did not help me with covenant creation at
Right.
all.
Right. And
Just a
that
tiny little
it was
blip.
yeah, it wasn't the book about covenant creation, because
Right.
everything with covenant creation came later.
Right.
It was just something that we were working on the Genesis debate issue
Yeah.
that
So then
yeah.
I went to your channel. Actually, I think you were beginning some new things at that time,
Right.
and I began listening. I said, okay, stuff makes sense, but still,
Sure.
there are other things that wasn't too sure about that. What really clicked for me is reading John Walton's book.
Exactly.
John Walton's book was like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
because you see, I don't know, I guess the way you learn things the first time, it really remains with you forever.
Exactly.
And we were all taught, we were all socialized or indoctrinated that the Genesis 1 6-day narrative is about a
Right.
material creation. It's about ex nihilo. I mean, everybody knows that. Right? So it's no, it's no point in
And you
even
and you have to take it
investigating that.
literally. You have to take it literally. That's
Yeah,
the
it's
point. You have
literal,
to take it literally.
right? And when I read this man's book, I'm saying, are you for real? The
Yeah.
Genesis 1 creation is not material. I'm like, I was ready to put down the book,
Right.
right? But I said, okay, let me check it out. Went through day 1, day 2, day 3. It's like, where's the material? Where's the material? It's just organizing things. And I said, what? So that is really what you see. And with me, I don't like to run with something
Right.
unless I get permission from an apostle or a prophet,
I see.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, I could tell you a million other views that I have,
Right.
but I would never make them public,
Right.
right? Because I
Right.
have really no biblical precedent for them.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and that's just me. Okay, as good as your thing sounds, if I can't get a bridge
Sure.
from the Bible to your thing,
Right.
I would say, okay, that sounds good, but I can't go with it. So John Walton really helped me to make that bridge,
Right.
make that link, to understand the Genesis 1 creation was not about material origin. And
Right.
when I could see it for myself, then it's
Right.
like, man, okay, game over,
Yeah.
right? And so I actually started writing Everything is Temple. Its name was not Everything is Temple. Its name was the name of it was something along the subhead, which was how we live in God's creation today.
Sure.
That was the main head. Okay. But it was during writing the book I read John Walton's book. So I had to rearrange the whole book. I had to do a complete rewrite of the book.
Yeah, for the audience here, John Walton's idea in The Lost World of Genesis 1 is that Genesis 1 is a temple dedication text common to the ancient Near East, where the deity is forming order out of chaos for a temple to dwell with his people. And ultimately, the idea there is the Sabbath is the concluding part and the high point of Genesis chapter 1. And the very last thing that the deity does before we reach the Sabbath is to put the image of the God himself in that temple to represent him to the world around. So that is a powerful perspective. And and you're not the only one that have said that about Walton's book. We've our book came out Christmas of 2007, so we didn't actually get the book until like February of 2008. John Walton's book came out the spring of 2009.
Right.
And when I got that book and read it, I was like, why didn't I have this? Why didn't I have this? I would have been very different. But I thought about it more, and it's like, it's kind of good because John Walton's book is almost like a sister book to Beyond Creation Science. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think that Beyond Creation Science didn't really register with you because of the American context of Beyond Creation Science? Because we are really writing with an American Christianity context of the Genesis debate, and that is not as big in other parts of the world. And so maybe that context, you don't share that American context or something like that. Do you think that might be part of it?
Not really. Actually, I don't know, but I can speak for the Caribbean. We are very much influenced by the American doctrine and the American teachings, right?
Yeah, because you had missionaries come tell you from America.
Yeah, a lot of guys pattern themselves off of the American televangelists and so on, right?
Okay.
So no, that did not come to my mind. But I learned a lot from Beyond Beyond Creation Science, But the thing that I really wanted is the covenant creation aspect, which was very little, very tiny amount of it in there. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't even have a concept of really what it meant as far as the details. Beyond Creation Science was only an introduction to the idea of a covenant creation. Like we had nothing about Genesis 1. And that's where Walton comes in, is he brings a whole different approach and perspective of a non-material origins. Functional origins, I think, is a technical word for that, which, functional and covenant kind of could be, both non-material. There's a lot of overlap in those two concepts. So so that's an interesting story. And I'm glad to hear that. But that was 2009 when that book came out. It was after our book. So we didn't have it to work with. When we were writing, we didn't have it. But that's an interesting thing. But I like the way the first 3 chapters of your book unfold, because you go with a new creation has come, there is a new Adam, and the temple of the heavens and the earth, God's meeting place with man. So your whole concept of everything is temple begins in Genesis. Yes. And that was a fascinating layout. I appreciate that. So but take us through some of that ideas as far as how the book unfolds from there.
Right. So I wanted to give an overview of the scripture, the Bible narrative from Genesis to Revelation, and to show and this is like something that you would learn if you learn to write a novel, where you would have the beginning. If you watch movies, you'd have a movie begin with everything that's idyllic, everything is going well. The husband kisses the wife goodbye, the child goes off to school, that sort of thing. And then immediately after that is you have all of this drama.
Plot. Like what's going to happen next? Exactly.
The child gets kidnapped or the husband gets into something, and then how that whole story is worked out. And then in the end, oh, they lived happily ever after.
Right.
And that's how the Bible is, right?
Exactly.
And so you have that grand overview. And that's something I had in my mind, like, okay, yes, if people could see the Bible like this, Christ is actually restoring or fixing the problem that Adam created in the beginning, right? And that if Christ is fixing what Adam did, then what Christ did has to equate to what Adam did. What Christ fixed has to equate to what Adam broke. So if Christ is fixing physical death, then Adam had to die physically in the garden, but he didn't. So therefore, that means Adam had to have some sort of spiritual or covenantal problem, which Christ came to fix. Right. So that's one of the goals that I had with that. So confusion about the nature of Adam's death in Eden, that's one of the goals that book seeks to explain. Right. And then misunderstanding about the covenantal concepts of the living and the dead. Who are the living and who are the dead? Once you understand who are the living and once you understand who are the dead, that these are covenantal titles or status, well, then it makes sense when Christ says, such when he said to the people, let the dead bury their dead. Right. And he called the patriarchs the living, even though they were long dead. Okay. So once you understand these are covenant status, then again, that solves a lot of things with concerning resurrection. Because if you have the dead come into life, then in your mind, okay, that has to be physical bodies coming out of physical graves. But if you understand it in the covenant context, then you don't need any graves. You can be resurrected right now, right? Because you're coming.
The whole concept with Adam and Eve is exile,
right,
away
from the presence of the Lord, right?
Of God, which is like a holy place. It's like a temple, like a center of a temple. So to end the exile and bring the people back into God's presence is that resurrection in life and presence of God. In the holy place, really face to face. That's really kind of the imagery that we see in the New Testament of God's people knowing Him and being united to Him face to face.
Right.
Like husband.
And the whole thing is in a temple context.
Yeah, right? that comes out really clear with Paul and Ephesians 2 and the temple being built together, the cornerstone and the capstone being Christ and apostles being the foundations, the imagery of New Jerusalem in Revelation with all the stones being, jewels and gems and fantastic, amazing things. So for value and preciousness.
Yes.
So that part of the book is super. Now, in chapter 4, you talk about the eras of the old covenant, heavens and earth.
Yes.
And you present this as being an unfolding of a priesthood being moved from one patriarch to the next.
Yes.
And I found that chapter to be absolutely fascinating because not a lot of people look at the Old Testament history in this flow of continuity from priesthood, from priest to priest to priest of that old covenant, heavens and earth. So I really appreciated that chapter. And you have a graph in that chapter of just a visual demonstration of how that works. And, to me, that's really kind of what the covenant creation view has always been, in the idea that the priesthood begins with Adam. Adam's the first covenant priest to represent God to everyone around him, as the sort of beachhead where God enters into history. He's the first Jesus, if you want to think of it in a typological sense. It's where God comes in to bring order out of chaos. He's the light. He's the beginning of the knowledge of God.
Yes.
So but go ahead. That's chapter 4, the eras of the old covenant, heavens and earth.
Yes, exactly. Because my previously or early, even while I was a young preterist, if you put it that way, my understanding of the old heavens and earth was Israel's covenant.
Yes.
Right, under Moses. And I think if you read the first book, it does seem to say that. But after growing more in my understanding, I realized, and the thing is, I think somebody mentioned this. I don't know who it was, that even in the Bible, the Old Testament begins in Genesis. So it's like, duh. Anyway, but my understanding grew to understand, wait a minute, here's Abel offering sacrifices,
Right.
here's Cain offering sacrifices,
Right.
and this is an old covenant thing,
Right.
because you don't find that in the new covenant, right?
Right.
So which means the old covenant really extended or began back in
Right.
Adam's time, and it was continually being amended, right, or
Right.
made relevant to whichever group of people it was being
Right.
enforced on. So when I got that understanding, I said, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So therefore, all of these are really eras of the
Yes.
old covenant world, right?
Yeah.
Not that they are starting new covenants,
Right.
right? No, they're the same covenant, because even when God spoke to Noah, he repeated. He
Right.
said, well, be fruitful, multiply,
Right.
and replenish, and have dominion over the animals, right? The only thing he said, well, okay, you can eat the animals now and
Right.
give the sign of the rainbow. Then it comes down to Moses. He tells Moses, well, look, you can't eat the clean and the unclean. But Israel was basically to do the same thing, to replenish, multiply, and
Right.
fill the land, right? So it's really the covenant being made relevant to that people to whom it was applied to.
Yeah, you see the reestablishments and sort of reconfirmations
Yes.
of the order that governs the old covenant. So, and then
Mhm.
you get into New Testament eschatology, with the new kingdom, the new Jerusalem, the new heavens and new earth, which
Yes.
basic preterist temple theology coming to its fulfillment.
Yes.
So that was good stuff.
Yes. Yes. Mhm. One of the
Now,
things, that I really, this is one of the highlights of my time as a preterist, and even generally as a Bible teacher. Because as I normally tell people, I normally surprise myself because you would be reading a text, and it's like, one example is the stone in Daniel 2.
right.
And I can't remember which year it was, but it was like maybe 2019, somewhere across there. This was before I was a preterist, though, so it can't be 2019. I was doing a Daniel 2 study. So it's got to be about 2015, 2016. And suddenly I realized the stone is a shaped stone. It's a quarried stone. And
Right.
every image I've ever seen of that stone was a boulder.
You're right. You're right. That's amazing.
Right? I said, and once I said, wow, so this is the temple stone.
Yes.
This is the stone of the new temple, right? So that now, with that knowledge, when it came over to preterism now,
Yeah.
okay, I can see now where the temple is being built.
Right.
It began with Christ, right? Christ is
Yeah.
the foundation, and he's also the headstone,
Right.
right? So he's the Alpha and he's the Omega,
He's a
and
stone.
everything in between,
He's a
right?
stone that comes from heaven too. It's like the
Yeah,
stone is like coming down and hitting that statue and
and demolishing
replacing
it. Yeah. So yeah, and so with all the stone imagery now, you'll find where Peter's talking about lively stones,
right.
making up a spiritual temple that we offer spiritual sacrifices. And then you have Paul talking about the apostles and the prophets being the foundation, and Christ. There's no other foundation that can be laid but Christ. And then you go into Revelation, and you see the prophets are the foundations of the
Right.
temple, and it's like, Wow.
Yeah.
And the thing, the thing that hits me with this, with preterist and covenant eschatology, fulfilled eschatology, is that these things are not things that are not in the Bible.
Right.
They are in the Bible. I basically know a lot of these things by heart because, as I said,
Right.
I came to love prophecy or end time prophecy. That was my thing.
Right.
But it was like, yeah, man, we're gonna see the Lord burst the sky, and the tombs will burst open, and that's, 'cause I love to paint that picture as
So,
an
so when,
evangelist.
so when you came to the idea of fulfillment,
Mm.
everything made sense.
Right, because it's already there. You already know it,
Right.
right? But now that you're looking at it from a different lens,
Right.
but it now fits together in such a better way than it did before, right? Because before, you're approaching you're approaching God's kingdom as something that you are outside of,
Right.
right? It's something that you don't have, and
Yes.
you're to be yearning for this thing until the day you die.
Right.
And that's the classic carrot on a stick thing,
Right.
right?
Right.
But when you're with covenant eschatology now, when you're preterism, you're there, you're in it, you have it. Okay,
Yeah.
and that's better,
Yeah.
right? And your whole worldview changes,
Right.
your whole prayer life changes, your
Right.
relationship with God changes. It's like, I mean, everything now to me is like, okay, God's got this,
Mm-hmm.
right? God's got this. So that, there's no more, well, boy, I I wish Christ would come, boy, because the world's gone to hell in a handbasket, or it's just gonna get worse. Prophecy have to fulfill, so things have to get worse before Christ comes. So buckle
Right.
up, and that sort of mentality is like, well, we have already basically lost the battle,
Right.
and we just hanging in there, and Christ has to come and clean up everything, right? So I think that's really not a good attitude to have if you want to be an overcomer.
Right. And your book goes into the whole idea of being new priests of God. So you have
Yes,
God's new priest, that
yes.
chapter about, let's
Mhm.
see,
The new priesthood.
the new priesthood. A new temple demands a new priesthood. And you've
Priesthood.
got two headings. You've got
Mhm.
the priesthood of Christ, and then
Yes.
you've got the new priests of God. And you bring those two things together so
Mhm.
well in that chapter. It
Yes.
was very exciting to watch that unfold.
Yes. And actually, God's people have always from the beginning been
Yes.
priests,
Yes.
right? Because they are the mediators between God and man,
Right.
right? So God's people are always priests. Even Israel, the whole nation of Israel was a priesthood, you call them a peculiar nation, a kingdom of priests. And then within that kingdom of priests, you would have the ministering priests, the Levites, and so on, right? But the nation itself was a priest,
Right.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, that set the whole context for your kind of the way you wrap it up in chapter 11. Living in the end or in the new beginning?
Mhm.
Question mark.
Yes.
And you went through the practical applications of what it means to live as God's priests in the world. No
Mhm.
matter where we are, we're, different countries, different callings, different
Yes.
vocations, and
Yes.
our priestly ministry to minister the gospel in all of these situations and bring healing to the nations, bring healing to those around us through the knowledge of Jesus Christ was, it was spectacular, that chapter. Because, when I wrote Beyond Creation Science with Jeff Vaughn, our last chapter is also that application side.
Mhm.
But you did an amazing job of putting that into like a personal setting that
Mhm.
that is relational based. I mean, that was one of the big things that I took away from it. Is you're really emphasizing how relationships are the vehicle by which we manifest the gospel in
Yes.
our world.
That's
And
true.
yeah, that's
Mhm.
a great chapter. That chapter 11, living in the end or in the new beginning, which is the new beginning of the new covenant heavens
And
and earth temple.
yes. Yes. And there's another thing that I when John saw the lampstands in Revelation chapter 1, the seven lampstands, and the interpretation of those lampstands were the seven lampstands that you saw, the seven candlesticks, the King James would say, but really is lampstands. Those are the seven churches, right? And when you think about it, the lampstand was of an article of furniture in the holy place. That's where that's the heavens of the priesthood. So that means that what God was showing the church is that he had made them priests. He had brought them into the priesthood. Because you remember in the time of Jesus, the priesthood was restricted to the Levites, right? So now the church, which was made up of all different types of people, they were being made priests. So that imagery of the lampstand, and that represents the church now. That means the church is the new priest of God.
And that's how the idea that Paul presents is you're like stars shining in the universe, right? The idea the stars are in the heavens, shining God's light.
Yes.
It's all connected to that vault, that firmament elevated position for the temples, for the priesthood to minister from the temple and teach God's ways and God's law and the beauty of Jesus Christ. So,
well, now that you mentioned the firmament too, I really man, this way of understanding the thing, it really, if people would adopt that understanding, then you wouldn't have all these flat earth discussions, because you understand the firmament. People believe there's a literal barrier there, right? If you understand the barrier as covenantal, right? Which in our time, if you understand, in our time, it's no longer there because Christ done away with the barrier.
I'm going to talk about that at our upcoming conference next year here in Montana. We've got a Montana conference. And that's one of my topics is the eschatology of the firmament.
Right.
So that'll be the direction that I'll go with that. I've done some work on it a little bit, but I've got a lot more that I've found in the last year or so. But let me finish up with I'm going to read two different passages kind of toward the end of your book that really I thought were helpful to me, and I'd like to put it out to people who might be considered in purchasing your book and looking at what you have to say. But you say, rethinking eschatology, page 386, you say, we need to rethink traditional Christian eschatology. Most Christians still await the second coming in the new heaven and earth. But a consistent reading of Christ's claims, his apostles' writings, and the historical record demonstrate these have already occurred. This fundamentally alters the future outlook and expectations of believers. Christians should be celebrating the new creation, the new heavens and earth, the new kingdom, the new temple, the new priesthood, the new law, the new Adam. And instead, they are ever looking for that which God has already accomplished. And there's one more line I wanted to add to that quote. You say, sadly, Christianity has contracted a chronic case of Nicodemus-itis. I laughed out loud when I read it. Nicodemus-itis.
Yes.
A totally flesh interpretation of the flesh teachings of Jesus and the apostles. Nicodemus, he didn't get it.
And just to demonstrate that, because just today or yesterday, I saw a meme in one of the preterist groups with a snake, a diagram or a drawing of a man dressed up in a serpent's costume, and it is mocking the covenant creation. It says, oh well, the snake is not really a snake, and but what did Jesus tell us the snake was? You know what I mean? So you're actually mocking Christ. It's not, you're not mocking me. Well, I'm following what Christ said.
The preterists should know who the children of the snakes are.
Exactly.
The vipers, snakes. So anyway, but one more paragraph here that I thought was super page 388 at the very end of your book. He says, this new creation makes possible our spirit's longing for a personal and intimate relationship with God.
Yes.
Christ and his apostles' counsels provide the framework for the development and maturity of such a relationship so that we are not led astray by fanaticism, conservatism, or liberalism. And I tell you what, my friend, where I live, the way you would sum up my world is fanaticism. Political fanaticism, just cultural fanaticism. And that statement, as centering us in Christ Jesus and that new relationship to deliver us from all of the bondage of those things, which are just idols. They're just modern idols that take people's take their lives and take all of their focus and all their energy and all their money and stuff. That was a great paragraph. So thank you very much for that, Maurice.
Thank the Lord.
And everybody. The title is Everything is Temple, How We Live in God's New Heavens and Earth Today. And there is a book review on this channel if you want to look at that as well. Give a good overview. What do you think about that book review?
Man, well, it's not so much what I thought, is what the viewers thought, because it's reflected in the sales of the book. When I went to my my KDP dashboard, where I can see the sales in a graph, depicted as a graph, man, spikes.
Oh, really?
3 days of spikes in sales.
Well,
so thank you so much.
Well, I just think it'd be helpful if people would look at it, and even if they disagree with certain aspects of the book.
I expect that.
There's enough in there that you could even disagree on Genesis issues or young Earth issues. You could still get a great deal of insight and wisdom from your teaching in the book. So thank you again for your book, and maybe we'll sit down again another time and have another chat and kind of follow up from there.
Yes, sure, no problem. And thank you also.
So, but everybody, I guess this is signing out. This is Tim Martin with Covenant Creation on YouTube, thanking Maurice Rogers for joining us here tonight. If you want to see some of his videos, it's the New Cosmos Videocast on YouTube. And do you have a website as well, Maurice? You want to give out the website?
Yes, the website is christhasalready.com.
Very good. Well, thank you, Maurice. Blessings to you, and I'll be watching your videos in the future. Have a good one. Blessings.
You too. Blessings.